it became evident to people across the country that spring, where the apple growers of Washington State struck on a brilliant marketing scheme. Just ship these apples to cities all across the country and get unemployed people to sell them on the corners for a dime. And in every town in America, there are apple sellers on the corner. And that's sort of when the country realized they were in something very deep and pretty bad. At the same time, Grass Valley was beginning to realize that they weren't being impacted by this. It was kind of the impression of a gunshot going off and kind of reaching and realizing you hadn't been hit. And that's sort of the experience they had by the summer of 1930. And in fact, gold mining had fallen to such a low state that there were only 500 mining jobs in this county, the richest mining districts in California. And by the summer of 1930s, the mines were bringing on more workers. Mr. McBoyle was bringing on more. The Empire Mine, which had by then combined with the North Star, was increasing employment, and mining employment was steadily increasing. It eventually would climb up to 2,600 people. The chart is in my book month by month. Climbed up to 2,600 people. And for every mining job, that is for every manufacturing job that is actually taking something, extracting something from the earth, and making something of it, that creates throughout the economy, depending upon which economist you listen to, 6 to 7 to 8 more jobs. So those mining jobs became the background of an employment boom in this county. In 1930, one of the people who came here and people started pouring in was a man named Joe Gast. And Joe had been raised in coal mining country in Kentucky. He was a wild young man. His father predicted he would be hung before he was 21. He had gone overseas in the 20s because in a lot of mining jobs, the best pay was overseas. He had worked in the Philippines for Newmont Mining Company. He was in an accident there. He had amnesia for a while. After that, Newmont was a little dubious about having him handle explosives. He lost his job with Newmont, but he got a job with National Geographic on a trek carrying in camera equipment and scientific equipment to Tibet. He had other kinds of experiences, made a lot of money overseas. His passport ran out. He came back to San Francisco in 1930 to renew his passport. In a couple of weeks, he blew all of the money he made overseas in San Francisco. Don't know whether he got the passport renewed because he heard about Grass Valley. And he came up here, and by his own report at the 4th of July picnic, he won the mucking contest and was immediately offered a job at the Empire Mine. He had to have a physical with Dr. Carl Jones. Everyone called him Dr. Carl before he could work at the mine. And so he went to Dr. Carl's office on South Auburn Street here, and in a mining accident in which he was buried underground for 72 hours before he was rescued, he had crushed his hand. And Dr. Carl, who was not known for delicacy of speech, looked at his hand and said, "You're only half a man." Well, Joe Guest invited him outside to see who was half a man. That's when the sheriff was called. And the sheriff, who was a World War I veteran and knew a lot about men and handling men, suggested to Dr. Jones that that wasn't a threat, it was an invitation, and that the doctor should probably not accept it. Well, Joe Guest eventually connected with Harold Nolan, better known in town as Bunce, Bunce Nolan of Bunce's Saloon on Mill Street in the news recently. And Joe started running a poker game, five-card draw in the back of Bunce's place. They split the take, but Bunce had some regulations. The game had to stop at midnight. The dealer couldn't bet, and most especially, number one, no high grading, no high-grade ore. That is, the miners could not bet with any of the ore that they had stolen out of the mine, a perennial problem in Grass Valley. Now, Joe quickly learned that that's exactly what the miners wanted to bet with. Their salaries, their wages, were for their families. The high grade was for them to take to the poker game. He chafed under any kind of restrictions anyway, and so he and Bunce parted company, although they remained friends. And Joe brought his poker game right here to this area of Main Street, once known as, and still known to many today as, the Waterfront. Now, it's called the Waterfront because, as Mark and Marie will tell you, the basements in this part of town get the drainage off of Alta Hill in the winter and flood every winter. But it's also called the Waterfront because in its day it had the air of a wide open western town or of a waterfront town. And this is where the brothels were in Grass Valley, located what would now be across the street from City Hall. And Joe moved his game to one of the brothels where a sympathetic madam let him have his game in the kitchen. And if they went after midnight, one of the girls made sandwiches. There was always coffee available. And those games would go not only after midnight, but after noon the next day. Joe became a very wealthy man. One of the things he did, to show you the caliber of this man, he always contributed liberally to political campaigns, especially the county sheriff. And in the eyes of the county sheriff, Joe Gass could do no wrong. He met a nice girl from Shelby Flat, where Karen lives out near Nevada City. Met her after a fracas at a dance one night in which Joe was involved in the fight and then was able to get away. They built a nice house outside of Grass Valley. They were married for over 50 years, and Joe had a great life here. The people I'm going to talk to you about are people who had a real impact on this community in the 1930s. Mr. McBoyle did because he really became what we would call in our day the paradigm. Anyone who had a prospect hole any place between here and Plumas County looked at McBoyle's story and said, I've got a property that maybe could pay the way Mr. McBoyle made the Idaho, Maryland pay. And he did a lot of things for employing people and did a lot of charity work, including building the Catholic Church and many other things. The left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing in his case, so we'll never know how much he really contributed. Joe Guest made his profound contribution to the liquidity of the place. The Great Depression was a liquidity crisis. It was a period of de-inflation. There wasn't enough money around. Looking back, the Nobel Prize economist Milton Friedman said they should have dropped money from helicopters. Our current chairman of the Federal Reserve, Mr. Bernanke, is known as Helicopter Ben. Well, high grade solved the liquidity crises in Grass Valley and Nevada City. It gave people something to spend.